what you can do to change your soil cation exchange capacity is by adding organic matter. And the reason for that is that the organic matter acts as sort of an enhancer of your existing cation exchange capacity, and it will hold on to nutrients. So the application of farmyard manure, which would be very high in organic matter, will be a good means to do that. And then following that, another good option is applying slurry. So these are both quite rich in organic matter, and they then will fix and amend your humus and will help, I suppose, grab onto those cations as they move through the soil.
The soil's fundamental properties have been set back in time, and your soil is the soil you must farm. However, there may be ways you can influence these properties, such as drainage, how and when the soil is tilled, and what is added to the soil over time. Knowing the core properties of your soil will help you to make better management decisions. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. If you're enjoying the series, we'd really appreciate it if you could follow the podcast and leave a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. Soils have different abilities to hold on to nutrients, and a fundamental part of this is the cation exchange capacity, which can be measured in all soils. At the Johnstown Castle Open Day a few weeks ago, I caught up with Eddie Casey to talk about why CEC matters. I first asked Eddie, what is cation exchange capacity?
So cation exchange capacity is, I suppose, a way of measuring how an anion, so a positively charged ion, sticks to the soil surface. So on clay particles in the soil, which have a negative charge, you'll have things like K+, so potassium, or you'll have magnesium, which will stick onto the surface of these cations, onto the surface of these clay particles as they move through the soil.
Okay. And would everybody know what their cation exchange is in their soil?
Generally, no. So this is kind of a new test that we can do in Ireland, and it's something that's been in place for a while, but it's really something we think that you should look into in your soil. You can get it done with certain soil tests, and there's more soil tests coming out to support this. And we think it's part of, I suppose, a soil-specific plan of looking at how your soil reacts to fertilizers. So it's all very well and good to know what your soil fertility is, and very important, but it's also very important to know how your soil reacts chemically with nutrients that you apply. And cation exchange capacity is a good measure of how your soil retains and holds on to nutrients.
So just to give people an idea, so if you have a high cation exchange, that's a good thing, is it?
Well, I suppose the difference is that a high cation exchange will hold on to your cations, onto your nutrients much better. So, for example, with K, it's been found that you could apply that K maybe in the autumn or in the spring, and it would be more likely to stay in and stay stable in a high cation exchange capacity soil. Whereas in a lower cation exchange capacity soil, which typically will be a more sandy soil, those nutrients are more likely to be leached by water. Now, also that might mean that they'd be easier uptaken by the plant, or they could be held onto the soil more tightly in a high cation exchange capacity soil, while released more easily in a low cation exchange capacity soil.
Okay, so it's not all good news necessarily. Even if you get it to a high scenario, it's not all good news. Now, I suppose the other question is then, can a farmer meaningfully change the cation exchange capacity? Because I presume it's pretty much down to what they have in the field themselves.
Yeah, well, I suppose the main determining factor of cation exchange capacity is the parent material of the soil. So you have lots of different types of clay. Now, clay is the biggest determinant, so they're fairly good proxies. The higher your clay content, usually the higher your cation exchange capacity. And then it depends on, whether you're on a sandstone soil, like in South Munster, where I'm from, or if you're on maybe a limestone soil, you'll have different types of clay mineralogy, it's called. Now, there is a way that a farmer can influence that, and the primary way he can do that, or she can do that, is by changing your soil organic matter. And that's usually through applying, as you might know, slurry or farmyard manure. That would increase your ability for the soil to hang on to those nutrients and therefore increase your cation exchange capacity.
Okay, so we're just giving people an idea about maybe soils around the country. You have a board here in front of us that we're looking at, very nice picture of profiles of various different soils. You might go through one or two of them and explain kind of what's on them here.
Yeah, certainly. So on this board, we've got 3 different soil profiles. I suppose we've got sandy brown earths, which are commonly found in the south and southeast of the country. You've also got pockets up around the border area and in the west of Ireland too.
That's very much a tillage soil, is it?
Yeah, a sandy brown earth could be, I suppose, predominantly used for tillage, but also for dairy systems and things like that. So that's most commonly found in the south and southeast of the country. It's generally a quite well-drained soil, which will have a low clay and a low humus content in it naturally. So it's quite amenable to losing nutrients downwards through itself. So even the cation exchange capacity might not be very high in this kind of soil. It'll tend to be low. So then the next soil we have here is a histic podzol. So this tends to be found in more waterlogged parts of the country, areas with high amounts of rainfall. So upland areas, the west of Ireland. And this is a soil where essentially a high level of rainfall has washed many of the nutrients down into the soil profile. So you have a kind of acidic but very humus-rich soil. So think about your colder, wetter land where your organic matter isn't rotting as quickly, so you have a build-up of organic matter over time. And because there's a higher amount of organic matter and a higher amount of clay in the soil, you tend to get a lot of nutrient retention. So we're not talking about a peat soil here. It's still a mineral soil, but it has a lot of leaching going on in it. And this is found in, as I said, upland areas or parts of the west of Ireland where you have lots of rainfall and cool summers.
And the third one then?
So the third soil type that we're displaying here today is alluviasol. So this is kind of a high clay soil. You'd often find this in river areas. It's poorly drained, but it's very, very efficient in trapping both nutrients and soil carbon. So think, I suppose, mostly of the Midlands. It's also found all throughout the country, but especially if we look at the likes of Kildare, Carlow, areas like that, you might have high levels of alluviasols in your area. And that's, I suppose, again, a very clay-rich soil. Can be as high as 30, 40, 50% even at times. And that really retains your positively charged nutrients. It really grabs them and keeps them there over high rainfall periods.
So going back then to how a farmer might influence in a small way or a big way the amount of sites, if you like, the Cation Exchange sites that are available in the soil to trap those nutrients. What's the big things they can do?
Yeah, so again, the biggest factor, I suppose, is just your parent material in your soil type. But what you can do to change your soil cation exchange capacity is by adding organic matter. And the reason for that is that the organic matter acts as sort of an enhancer of your existing cation exchange capacity, and it will hold on to nutrients. So the application of farmyard manure, which would be very high in organic matter, will be a good means to do that. And then following that, another good option is applying slurry. So these are both quite rich in organic matter, and they then will fix and amend your humus and will help, I suppose, grab onto those cations as they move through the soil.
Okay. So presumably then, I mean, so farmyard manure, that's 50% dry matter, you're putting on 5 tons, you're putting on a good lot of it. Whereas on the likes of the slurries, it's lowish enough, maybe 4% dry matter, not as much in it. So obviously it's a matter of proportionality in terms of what you're going to put on. Do you have any idea in terms of, and tillage farmers are obviously putting on some, they're chopping straw quite a lot as well. I presume that's equally as good. But do you have any idea how much it can be shifted over time? Or are you only really talking about, the small layer towards the top?
The differences that you'll make are quite small. They can be meaningful. But this is measured, I suppose, in millimoles per centimetre. So it's a small measurement anyways, and shifting it with organic matter is probably your biggest payback. So, when you apply your organic matter, you will move it in a positive direction or in an upward direction. But it's a very, very small thing. I suppose the biggest thing is knowing your soil and knowing your area. There's a good bit you can do when it comes to applying organic matter. There's also other management practices that will help, like making sure your soil isn't compacted. There's good air movement through your soil, as most tillage farmers will know. You have to make sure you have a good, nice seed bed for your plant and that there's a lot of air and water movement through your soil. And that will help to expose, I suppose, the binding areas on your soil particles. But in large, the best thing you can do is to make sure you've got a good application of farmyard manure, and then following that slurry as well is another good option.
Okay. So where can people find that information? I'm just looking at some maps here that you have here. Where do you find those maps?
Well, I suppose the Irish Soil Information System, which is developed by Teagasc, is a good means of figuring out what sort of soil you have. There's also a lot of soil tests that you can go about now that have that option of looking at your cation exchange capacity on them. That's a really good way of getting a granular look at your soil.
The Malick test, I think, was done. You can get that as part of that. Yeah. And the Department of Agriculture actually did a good bit of that soil testing over the last couple of years. Is that contained in that?
Well, the Malick test is a look at, I suppose, how it's slightly more aggressive than your traditional Morgan's test, which would have looked at, I suppose, your loosely attached nutrients. So your Malick's is a more aggressive test where it looks at, I suppose, what other nutrients are more locked into the soil than your Morgan's would. And yeah, you can also get a cation exchange capacity analysis done on that. So it's a slightly different test, but it's part of that whole battery as well.
Listen, thanks very much. It's very good to give farmers that information, because I think our assessment of soil health and assessment of nutrient trapping, it needs to be nuanced, I think, with all the new information that's going to come along. Thanks very much. Thanks, Eddie. So that's it for this episode, and my thanks to Eddie for joining me on the show. If you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.